So in this segment, we're going to be discussing kind of von der Leyen saying the UK could rejoin the EU, and this is her talking in a personal capacity rather than on behalf of the EU, and she does make that clear, which I think is a good move considering these are obviously not the viewpoints of the member states, because we don't know what their viewpoint is on the UK rejoining the EU. Amongst other things, you do have a lot of problems within the UK anyways around the criteria, the Copenhagen criteria, which is something like certain people have failed to acknowledge, which we'll be discussing. But I find I disagree with some of the stuff she says here, and I don't know, I don't understand some of these statements, honestly. So at an event in Brussels, von der Leyen admitted that European leaders had goofed up over the departure of Britain from the bloc and suggested the younger generation could fix it. Asked if the UK could ever rejoin the EU, she replied, quote, "I must say, I keep telling my children, you have to fix it. We goofed up, you have to fix it. So I think here too, the direction of travel, my personal opinion, is clear," end quote. And Sunak obviously, said, that's not going to happen and whatever, blah, 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 the standard Sunak nonsense. Von der Leyen made the comments at an award ceremony staged by Politico as relations between the UK and the EU relations between the UK and the EU improved following their near collapse under Boris Johnson and David Frost. It was really bad, honestly. Cameron was there, obviously Remainer, but he didn't want to undermine the Prime Minister. So, there are still problems, things like the Windsor Framework with Priti Patel kind of causing a problem, but, Priti Patel is, she's not going to be Priti Patel of the rebellion, let's be honest. Obviously, the Labour Party are in a position where they don't want to rejoin the EU. They said they want things like alignment on certain goods to make trade easier, but, they're not kind of moving in that direction just yet, or maybe not for a while. I don't know. What exists in the heart of politicians, I will never know. But we got to this clip from Femi, and I find I disagree with some of the stuff. With von der Leyen, she says that we goofed up talking about the EU, I think, and the blame list for Brexit is nothing. The EU wouldn't make my top 5. I'll be honest. I think it would be David Cameron, because he botched it by calling a referendum in the first place. I would put probably Nigel Farage second, I'll be honest. I'd put the whole of the British media third, like everyone in the British media for the most part third, because the conversation around it was around the EU and things like that was so brain dead. Like, how do you put someone like I can't remember her name, the Tory MP, Andrea Leadsom, that's it. How do you put Andrea Leadsom next to Pascal Lamy, who was the former head of the WTO? I know I made a mistake before because I said it was David Lammy, but it's Pascal Lamy, the former head of the WTO, and put them on the same platform and act like these people deserve the same amount of respect and prestige, when one person ran the WTO whilst the other person doesn't really have any achievements of note. I'll be honest. I think her biggest achievement was when she said she would be a better prime minister or something on those lines because she was a mother, and then everyone was like, what do you mean by that? And then she resigned and Theresa May became Prime Minister. That might have been her biggest feat, honestly. So, I would put the majority of the British media, honestly. So David Cameron, Farage, the media, I'd probably put Jacob Rees-Mogg, because I really don't like Mogg, and I'd probably put Jeremy Corbyn in 5th. So, the EU don't make the top 5. They shouldn't even make the top 10, I'll be honest. The only person from the EU who would make my top 10 is probably Juncker, because I despise Jean-Claude Juncker. Absolutely hate him. So, the idea around the EU goofing up, I think maybe they'll look at ways of tightening up things, and I don't know what they could do from here, but, the only people at fault for Britain leaving is I want to say British people, but it's not. It's mostly people in England, I'll be honest. So that's where the main fault lies, in my opinion anyways. So I disagree with what von der Leyen is saying here, but I guess it does show you that, at least the conversation has moved on a lot. There's not as much animosity, I think, which is obviously great, because I think that will help the UK in the conversation of rejoining the EU, but we still have things to navigate, like the Copenhagen criteria, amongst other things. So we're going to cut to people who just pretend like this is an inevitability, the UK joining the EU. Why always Femi? I don't know.
She's just stating the obvious, that
He's talking about von der Leyen here.
Joining the EU is inevitable. I mean, we knew it would be inevitable from a long time ago. I think back in 2018, it was published that because of how young people tended to vote Remain, old people tended to vote Leave, Peter Kellner even calculated that by 2020, just by pure demographic shift, we would have a Remain voting population, and all the polls back that up.
It's still about, I think, 56% of people want to rejoin the EU. So it's shifting, but it's not shifted. And then you still have to look at what negotiations would look like as well. Like, it's not just as straightforward as us rejoining on the old terms we had. You know, most likely would still have to adopt the euro, join Schengen, and I don't know how much the older voters would want to do that, even some of the kind of middle-aged voters.
Right.
Because I don't think British people are still convinced on freedom of movement, I'll be honest.
Now, you say that people have generally accepted it, we're just going to stick with Brexit, but no, polls show that by 51 to 32, according to YouGov, we would vote to rejoin the EU, and that's because, again, the polls show that 60% of the population believes that Brexit has made us poorer, and we're in a cost of living crisis. We simply cannot afford this.
And then the question is, what are these people going to do about it? Because the two main parties in the UK are Brexit voting parties. Brexit supporting parties in a sense, right? Labour are saying we're going to make Brexit work and whatever. The Tories, obviously, they're the Brexit party. So how is that going to work? Because you can say, like, the polls say this, such many people want this to happen. It doesn't work like that, because there's no pressure on the parties to even have that conversation. Honestly. Forget like the Copenhagen criteria. Forget the EU members' veto and all of these things, right? Like the argument of British people want to rejoin, like, so what? Like, if the majority of people want to rejoin, are they putting pressure on politicians to do so? This argument of inevitability, like, in a cost of living crisis right now, we've, I think, had it the worst out of most European countries, or at least most developed European countries. We've had it the worst. Or it's been pretty bad, I'll be honest. There's not been massive protests or anything about it. I think if they were seeing this kind of pressure in France, or some of the other European countries, I think that'd be mass protests and other things. But we've barely seen anything, just because of the fact that people in Britain are unhappy with Brexit. It doesn't really change things. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, it's a case of, yeah, we won the argument, but so what? Like, it doesn't change anything. This argument of inevitability, I think it's snake oil. There's so much work left to be done here for us, to get to meet the ascension criteria. It would require a dramatic shift. It would require, I think, a change in the voting system, which no one's even having that conversation. I know there are people who are going to try and change it. I've had a discussion with them, such a person. But, for the UK to change the proportional representation system, I just can't see it happening. We had a chance back in the early 2010s, never took it, and I just can't see it happening. I'm sorry to say. There was this voter who voted Brexit, but he says, essentially he sees, because the economy is tanking, he sees Britain trying to rejoin the EU, but, the EU are just going to turn around and say, I missed the part where that's my problem. Because why would the EU want a sinking ship to join? It doesn't make sense, and this is what I mean, this argument of inevitability. And I watched someone else's video, Lambert's video, saying the UK desperately needs to rejoin the EU, which is fine. That's something a lot of people have said. But the question is, what's in it for the EU? Why? Again, to quote Tobey Maguire, I missed the part where that's my problem. That's what they could turn around and say to us. It's frustrating, this conversation, I'll be honest. Because even if the people in the UK want it, it doesn't change anything. Honestly, it doesn't really change much. So, I disagree with a lot of people saying it's inevitable. Like, the only way you make it inevitable is if you put the work in and you change a lot of the things in the UK and you make us a team player. That's the only way this is going to happen. You make us an asset to the EU, a country that they would want to take back. Because we've proved ourselves to be an unreliable partner. We proved ourselves to be unreliable when it came to customs, because we were a backdoor for countries to get their goods in without clearing customs. We proved that when we didn't implement all of the kind of EU rules. We proved that when we tried to play silly games around the Northern Ireland Protocol. We are not a reliable partner. And it's up to the politicians to rebuild that trust. And, I think there's something Thor said, broken bones can heal, but broken trust, that can take a long time to mend. Something on those lines in Avengers Assemble. I just cannot see it happening. And, we go on to more analysis, and I don't know, maybe we talk about this geezer too much, But, you got Sir John Curtis telling Labour voters are overwhelmingly pro-EU, and Starmer risks losing their support in any government, in any Labour government that fails to recognise that. And you got Phil saying people keep coming at this angle wrong. They keep supposing that a party that's given itself a consistent 20-point plus lead in the polls for well over a year is not mindful of something this basic. You should see it as a case of that. Of course, Labour are going to act on it, which is, a completely dumb statement, because Labour are just taking these voters for granted. Because who else are they going to vote for? The Lib Dems and the Greens are the only options, but they're not going to win. And I think people are so sick of the Tories now, they're more than happy to say this time out, I'm going to vote Labour to get rid of the Tories, depending on their seat. But in 5 years' time, when Labour barely moved on this, which I can't see them moving on it that much, because they desperately think, they need to keep the Red Wall to be a Brexit party. I can't see them fundamentally shifting on it. And, you got this guy, John Ball, saying, trouble is, if when Labour win, they will do nothing towards rejoining the EU. They leave us rejoiners nowhere to go, and no real way to hold them accountable, which is true. And kind of Phil being right here, saying people think joining the EU is like flipping a switch. But if you look at what's involved, he mentions like some of the initial steps are Labour policy, which not really, apart from alignment. That's only if we do dynamic alignment, really, is it a shift. But, for the most part, Labour policy, I don't think is shifting towards kind of EU policy. So, I just don't think that's a true statement here. I'll be honest. So, it's just the conversations we're having in the UK is, joining the EU is inevitable. Like, it's not true. Like, the political parties aren't taking rejoiners seriously, because again, the Labour Party are seeing this as a situation where they have these votes on lock. So why would they even shift policy? They've done extreme triangulation, trying to appeal to Wokington Man and all this nonsense. And in 5 years' time, they're probably going to do the same thing, because they're going to turn around and say to you, if you don't vote for us, you're helping the Tories. You don't want to help the Tories. So I don't appreciate. There's so much work to be done. It's not inevitable. I really disagree with that statement she made. I really disagree with her saying the EU goofed up on this. The only one I'd say goofed is Juncker. I'll be honest. I don't think I think most of the other EU politicians were fine. I think Angela Merkel said, "Well, it's tragic, but what are we supposed to do at this point?" Something on those lines. But anyways, let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.